Rain came down in sheets, slicing through the night like judgment. The air was thick with smoke and fear, the kind that tastes like burnt metal and gasoline. Blue and red lights flashed against the slick highway, reflecting off twisted steel and broken glass. Sirens screamed somewhere in the distance, then cut off suddenly, as if even the city itself didn't want to speak over what had just happened. A private jet lay torn apart in a field outside Atlanta, its silver body cracked open like a secret too heavy to keep. Steam hissed from the wings, and the smell of jet fuel strung the air. It wasn't just another crash. You could feel it. This was something bigger, something dirty. And walking through the mud and chaos came a man who didn't belong there, at least not to anyone looking from the outside. His name was Isaiah Cole, 38 years old, skin like iron under the rain, hands darkened by years of oil and work. A mechanic by trade, a thinker by heart. His boots sank deep into the wet ground as he moved, a small red toolbox swinging at his side. The cops watched him like a shadow that refused to fade. "Hey," one of them yelled, smirking. "You lost, buddy. This ain't your garage." Laughter followed, low, careless, the kind that always comes from men who think uniforms make them untouchable. Isaiah didn't answer. He just kept walking, eyes fixed on the wreck. He'd spent 15 years building engines just like that, crafting the heartbeats of machines that touched the sky. But the one before him looked wrong, torn in places that shouldn't tear, burned in ways no fire should burn. He dropped to one knee beside the turbine, his reflection warped in the slick metal. His hands hovered, trembling not from fear, but from knowing. He touched the edge of the engine, like a man touching the body of someone he once loved. Behind him, another officer chuckled. "Look, the man wants to play engineer. Step back, mechanic. Let the professionals handle it." His tone was sharp, practiced, the kind used to keep men like Isaiah small. But Isaiah rose slowly, rain dripping from his jaw, his eyes steady. "Then I hope your professionals," he said, voice low but cutting through the storm, "can tell a cover-up when they see one." The laughter stopped. Even the rain seemed to quiet for a second. The senior officer frowned, stepping closer. "What did you just say?" Isaiah didn't blink. That engine didn't fail. Someone made it fail. For a moment, no one spoke. The officers exchanged looks, unsure whether to mock or arrest him. But Isaiah was already turning back to the wreckage, tracing his fingers over melted wiring that shouldn't have melted that way. He saw markings on the casing, numbers that didn't match any standard model. The more he looked, the heavier the truth became in his chest. He'd built this model once for a private firm, one that bragged about safety, about perfection. And yet here it was, scattered in pieces, its story written in flame and metal. A voice called from behind, "Sir, this is an active investigation zone. I'm gonna need you to step away." But Isaiah didn't move. His mind was racing. There, near the rear casing, a small fracture line, deliberately scored. He knew that cut. He'd seen it before in the shop, when executives wanted a controlled malfunction for testing, except this wasn't a test. This was real. He turned, eyes locking with the lead investigator, a tall white man with cold eyes and a clipboard that probably weighed more than the truth he carried. "You're not gonna find what you're looking for if you keep pretending you already know," Isaiah said. That engine didn't give out. It was made to. The man sneered. "Made to? You're telling me this was sabotage?" Isaiah hesitated. The word hung there dangerous, but deep down he already knew it. "Yes," he said finally, "sabotage or worse." The officer stepped closer, his badge glinting under the flashing lights. "And what makes you so sure, mechanic?" he asked, dragging the word mechanic like an insult. Isaiah met his stare, unflinching. "Because I built it, and I know my own work." That silenced them all. The radio crackled somewhere, static mixing with the storm. For the first time, their eyes shifted from mockery to suspicion, from laughter to unease. The power had shifted, just a little, but enough for Isaiah to feel it. He'd seen this before, men with badges who thought truth was optional, who'd rather bury evidence than explain it. A rookie officer whispered to another, "Wait, he built it." but the senior one waved it off. "Get him out of here," he ordered, "before he messes with the evidence." As they reached for him, Isaiah stepped back, raising his hands slightly, not in surrender but in warning. "You think pushing me out will hide this?" he said. "Go ahead, file your reports, clean your site, but the truth doesn't burn that easy." They shoved him anyway. The rain splashed against his face as he stumbled, his toolbox falling open, wrenches scattering in the mud. The officer smirked, wiping his hands. "That's what I thought." Isaiah crouched, picking up his tools one by one, silent, calm, too calm, because he'd already seen enough. He'd seen the cut line, the altered serial code, the signature of corruption. Someone high up had wanted that jet to go down, and they thought no one from the garage would ever notice. But Isaiah had, and that made him dangerous. As he rose again, a flash of lightning cut through the sky, lighting the field in white. For a split second he saw it, a small black box half buried in the mud, its red light still blinking faintly. The flight recorder. He looked up. None of the officers had seen it yet. They were too busy laughing, too busy congratulating themselves on another contained scene. Isaiah took a slow step toward it, then another. The rain masked the sound of his boots. He reached down, slipping the recorder into his jacket. His heart pounded. He didn't know who the passengers were or why this jet mattered so much, but something in his gut told him this wasn't just about engines. This was about people, powerful people. "Get him off sight," one of the officers yelled again. But Isaiah was already walking away, toolbox in one hand, secrets in the other. He didn't look back, didn't need to. The wreckage would keep burning, but now it burned with purpose. As he reached the edge of the field, the sirens behind him faded into the storm. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, untouched by what had just happened. Isaiah stopped, turning once to watch the wreck one last time. "They'll come for this," he whispered to himself, "and they'll come for me." The wind howled through the trees, carrying his words into the dark. Somewhere out there, powerful men were already preparing their lies. But Isaiah wasn't the kind of man who bowed. His hands might have been stained with oil, but tonight they held truth. And before the night was over, that truth would make the whole city tremble. The morning after the crash felt heavier than the night itself. The sky was still bruised with clouds, gray and swollen, like it hadn't finished crying yet. Isaiah stood outside a diner on the edge of town, the newspaper trembling in his hand. "Pilot error causes crash," the headline screamed in bold black letters. He read it once, then again. Each word felt like another nail sealing the truth away. Pilot error. Just 2 words to erase every lie, every secret, every life that burned in that wreck. He stared at the photo beneath it, the twisted remains of the jet, and his reflection wavered in the glossy ink, a man caught between rage and disbelief. He'd serviced that jet himself, 3 days before takeoff, every system tested, every bolt tightened, every warning light checked. He remembered the sound of the engine humming under his fingers, steady as a heartbeat. There was no error, no flaw, no way that jet had just fallen from the sky, not unless someone wanted it to. But the world didn't care about men like Isaiah. They cared about owners, investors, billionaires, the ones whose names printed in gold while his stayed covered in grease. By noon, he was back on that lonely stretch of field outside Atlanta. The crash site looked different in daylight, quieter, colder, emptier. Yellow police tape fluttered in the wind like taunting ribbons. Reporters hovered behind the barriers, shouting questions Isaiah didn't answer. He pushed forward anyway, clutching his toolbox like armor. That's when a voice cut through the crowd. "You again," the same officer from last night stepped forward, chewing on a toothpick, smirk curling under his mustache. "Didn't I tell you to stay off this site?" Isaiah stopped short, his boots sinking in the mud. "I just came to." "Unless you're confessing," the officer interrupted, stepping closer, "you can leave." Isaiah frowned. Confessing to what? Sabotage. That word hit like a gunshot. The officer's tone was casual, but his eyes carried something cruel. Another cop stepped beside him, arms folded. Owner says you were the last man to touch that plane, he added, voice flat but sharp. Isaiah blinked, trying to catch his breath. That's because I work on the planes. That's my job. But the sneers only deepened. Cameras flashed from behind the tape as reporters caught wind of the moment, a black man, all stained, standing in front of a billionaire's wreck. The perfect story, the perfect scapegoat. The questions started flying. Sir, are you responsible for the crash? Is it true you tampered with the engine? Did you have any conflict with the company? Each one slicing closer, hungrier. Isaiah's jaw tightened. I didn't do this. His voice was steady, but the tremor beneath it was rage. That jet was perfect when it left my hands. The officer chuckled. Sure it was. He walked a slow circle around Isaiah, studying him like a suspect already found guilty. You people always got an excuse, always someone else's fault, huh? Isaiah turned his head, meeting the man's smirk. You people, the words came out like thunder under his breath. The sergeant smiled thinly, enjoying his power. All I'm saying is, we've got witnesses, we've got records, and we've got motive. Looks like you wanted a payday gone wrong. A small crowd had gathered now, reporters, workers, bystanders, all watching this quiet humiliation unfold. Isaiah could feel every stare like a stone thrown his way. He'd been here before, not in this exact place, but in this feeling, where a man's color spoke louder than his truth, where years of hard work could vanish with a single lie. He took a breath, forcing calm. You want the truth, he said slowly, eyes sharp. Then check the flight recorder. Laughter broke out behind the badge. What would you know about that? The sergeant mocked, nudging the other officer with a grin. You think you can read that thing? Isaiah didn't move, didn't blink. He just looked him dead in the eyes and said, enough to know it doesn't lie. For the first time, the sergeant's grin faltered. The air shifted just slightly. The rain started again, thin and cold. Isaiah's stare didn't waver. Behind it was a storm that had been building for years. The kind of quiet rage born from being overlooked, underestimated, and pushed down too long. You think you're smart, huh? The sergeant said, his voice dropping low. Think you're gonna walk in here and tell us how to do our job? Isaiah leaned in, his tone calm, measured. No, I think I'm gonna tell you what you don't wanna hear. The officer blinked. Isaiah continued, that plane didn't crash because of a mistake. It crashed because someone wanted it to. And if you don't check that recorder, you'll never see who. The silence that followed was thick. The reporters had stopped shouting. Even the wind seemed to pause. The sergeant stared at him for a long moment, then scoffed. Get him out of here. Two cops stepped forward, gripping Isaiah by the arms. He didn't resist. His eyes stayed locked on the wreckage as they dragged him away, mud splattering his clothes. You're making a mistake, he said quietly, but the words drowned under their laughter. They tossed him past the barrier like trash. Cameras caught it all, the shove, the fall, the mud-stained mechanic. Somewhere behind the lights and lenses, the truth was bleeding out, unnoticed. Isaiah sat there for a moment, catching his breath. The rain washed over him, mixing with the oil and dirt on his hands. In his jacket pocket, the flight recorder, the one he'd taken the night before, pressed cold against his chest. He hadn't told them about it, not yet, but he knew he would, when the time was right, when the world was ready to listen. He stood slowly, every muscle tight, every heartbeat louder than the rain. He looked back at the police tape fluttering in the wind, at the men who laughed like gods behind their badges. His lips curled in a half-smile, not of joy, but of knowing. You can bury the truth, he whispered to himself, but you can't keep it from breathing. Somewhere deep in his pocket, the small red light on the recorder blinked once, then again, still alive, still telling the story no headline wanted to print. As Isaiah walked away, the crowd parted like the sea, some with pity, some with disgust, most with silence. He didn't need their words. He carried something stronger, proof, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. By the time he reached the road, the sound of sirens faded behind him. The city stretched ahead, grey and endless. Each step felt heavier, but his resolve burned hotter. He knew this wasn't over. They could mock him, blame him, smear his name across every screen, but one day soon, that black box would speak. And when it did, the same men who laughed today would choke on their lies tomorrow. Because the truth, just like the rain, always finds its way through the cracks. The control room smelled like burnt coffee and arrogance. 2 days had passed since the crash, but the air was still heavy with tension and rain-soaked secrets. The officers stood around the long metal table like vultures waiting for a meal. A single black device sat in the center, small, dented, and silent. The flight recorder. The truth, trapped inside a box no bigger than a man's heart. Isaiah stood at the far end of the room, hands clasped behind his back, the oil still stained deep into his knuckles like a badge he never asked for. The same officers who had mocked him at the crash site were here too, same smirks, same lazy confidence that came with knowing the system always chose their side. The sergeant leaned forward, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "Well, Mr. Cole," he said, drawing out the name, "since you were so sure this little toy would clear your name, I suppose you'll enjoy the show." Laughter rippled through the room. Isaiah didn't respond. He just stared at the recorder, quiet, steady, patient, the way a man does when he knows time is finally about to speak for him. A technician stepped up, pressed a few buttons, and the room filled with a soft hiss of static. Everyone leaned in. The first few minutes played out calm, a pilot's steady breathing, the gentle hum of the engine, chatter about weather and flight path. The sergeant smirked, already crossing his arms. "Sounds normal to me," he muttered, loud enough for Isaiah to hear. But Isaiah didn't move. He just kept his eyes on the screen, jaw tight, heartbeat steady. Then the calm shattered. A burst of static cut through the speakers, followed by a pilot's voice trembling with panic. "Engine failure, I repeat, engine failure. Someone tampered with the fuel system." The room froze. Every head turned toward Isaiah at once. The sergeant's lips curled into a cruel smile. "There it is," he said. "Your handiwork, mechanic." The word hit the air like a slap. Mechanic, always that word, always used to remind him where he stood in their eyes. Isaiah opened his mouth to speak, but before a single sound left him, another voice came through the speakers, colder, lower, and wrong. "Disable the safety checks. We'll handle it later. We can't afford another delay." The room went silent. The voice was Isaiah's. It wasn't a pilot, either. It was calm, commanding, confident, the kind of voice used to giving orders, not following them. A few of the younger officers exchanged glances, unsure. The sergeant frowned, tilting his head. "Who the hell was that?" he asked. The technician hesitated, scrolling through the data log. It's coming from the ground channel," he said. "A call patched through before takeoff. The system recorded it." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. He knew that voice. Every word crawled through his memory like a ghost. Richard Crane, billionaire, jet owner, the man who signed his checks. The man whose company had insisted the plane fly that day despite mechanical warnings. The same man now playing innocent on every news channel in America. Isaiah felt the world slow down around him. The laughter died. The smirks faded. One officer stepped back, his face drained of color. Another looked at the sergeant, whispering, That's Crane, isn't it?" The sergeant's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't answer. The black box played on, the chaos in the cockpit growing, alarms blaring, the pilot shouting, "We are losing pressure. Safety systems are offline. I can't." Then silence. Static. End of recording. The technician stopped the playback. The room felt hollow. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of nervous boots on linoleum. Nobody laughed now. Nobody spoke. The power that filled this room just minutes ago had evaporated. All that was left was truth, raw and heavy. Isaiah took a slow step forward. "You hear it now?" he said softly. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was the voice of a man who'd carried disbelief long enough to stop needing it. That voice wasn't mine. It never was. The sergeant's jaw worked, but no words came out. He looked smaller now, his badge suddenly less shiny. The technician avoided eye contact. The younger officers fidgeted, unsure whether to apologize or pretend they hadn't laughed at him 2 days ago. Isaiah looked at them all, not with hate, not with victory, but with something deeper, disappointment. "You were so sure," he said quietly. "You had your story written before the truth ever had a chance to speak." The sergeant finally found his voice. "We will have to verify that recording," he stammered. "Chain of custody." Isaiah cut him off. "You do that, but you and I both know what we just heard." Silence again. The truth hung in the air like smoke that refused to fade. The sergeant glanced at the others, but none of them would meet his eyes. His authority had melted away, not with violence, not with force, but with truth spoken in his own house. Isaiah turned toward the door. Every step echoed through the room, slow and deliberate. He stopped at the threshold, hand resting on the frame. "I told you," he said, not looking back, "that box doesn't lie." Then he walked out, leaving the officers standing in their own shame. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Light spilled across the wet pavement, reflecting off puddles like glass. Isaiah stood there for a moment, breathing it in. Freedom didn't always come with applause. Sometimes it came with silence, the kind that follows when lies finally run out of breath. Down the hall, he could still hear faint voices from the control room, hurried whispers, phones ringing, panic setting in. They'd try to spin it, of course. They'd try to bury it, twist it, reframe it. Men like Crane always had a way of making truth expensive. But the recording existed now. It was real. It was undeniable. Isaiah reached into his pocket, pulling out his old, grease-stained handkerchief, wiping the sweat from his brow. His reflection in the window caught his eye, tired, worn, but unbroken. For once, he didn't see a mechanic. He saw a man who refused to be erased. As he stepped outside, a reporter shouted from across the lot, camera flashing, "Mr. Cole, any comment on the new evidence?" Isaiah paused, turning just enough for the camera to catch his profile. "Yeah," he said, voice calm and firm, "sometimes the truth just needs a voice." And with that, he walked away, the morning light chasing his shadow down the steps. Because in the end, truth didn't need to shout, it just needed to be heard. The microphones clicked like gunfire. Flashbulbs exploded across the room, painting the air in white bursts of chaos. And right there, in the middle of that storm, Isaiah stood, shoulders squared, eyes calm, heart steady. The same police chief who once mocked him now stood just inches away, the sweat on his brow glistening under the heat of truth. 1 week ago, that man laughed at him in front of the whole department. 1 week ago, Isaiah was just the mechanic, a man with oil on his hands and nothing on his side but conscience. But today, the world knew everything. The lies, the greed, the corners cut to save $1, all of it traced back to Crane. The chief's pride had gone up in smoke, just like the cars his negligence destroyed. The cameras loved the tension. Every flash was a question. Every silence was a headline waiting to happen. Reporters leaned forward, hungry for the sound of confession or collapse. But Isaiah didn't flinch. His voice was low, grounded, the way truth sounds when it's not trying to prove itself. The chief avoided his eyes. He knew that for all his badges and medals, he'd lost something. Isaiah still had dignity. When the first reporter spoke, her tone was sharp. "Mr. Green, how does it feel to be vindicated after all this?" Isaiah blinked slowly, like a man remembering fire. His hands hung at his sides, rough, scarred, still stained from the night he tried to pull victims out of the burning wreckage. He stared at them for a long moment, the weight of years and insults caught in every line on his palms. "You don't need a badge," he said quietly, "or $1 billion to stand for what's right. You just need the courage not to walk away." A hush fell over the room. Even the cameras seemed to pause. The chief shifted, swallowing hard, but Isaiah didn't look at him. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about truth, the kind of truth that burns through lies like sunlight through fog. For a second, it felt like everyone could see it. The smoke that had covered the truth for years was finally clearing. In the back row, some of the same officers who once laughed at Isaiah now stared at the floor, their faces tight with shame. The memory of their laughter, loud, mocking, cruel, hung in the air like a ghost. One of them had even called him the oil boy, back when Crane made him the department's scapegoat. Now that same man's hands trembled around his notepad. The power had shifted, but Isaiah didn't smile. He wasn't here to gloat. He was here to rebuild something broken, not the machines, but the hearts behind the badges. As the conference ended and the reporters began to scatter, Isaiah turned toward the exit. The sound of heels, whispers, and the metallic click of cameras faded behind him. He could feel the cool wind hit his face as he stepped outside, the first clean breath he'd taken in a long time. But before he could leave, he heard a quiet voice behind him. "Sir." He turned. A young officer, barely out of his 20s, stood there, cap in his hands, eyes lowered. His face carried the guilt of someone who'd seen the truth too late. "I just wanted to say," the young man stammered, "I'm sorry. I judged you before I even heard you." Isaiah studied him for a moment, the nervous posture, the trembling jaw, the shame that comes when the world flips your reflection. Then he nodded, a slow, steady motion filled with understanding. "Then you've already learned what most men never do," he said softly. "Respect speaks louder than power." The young man looked up, his eyes bright, almost wet. For a moment, it wasn't a conversation between a mechanic and a cop. It was between two men, one who had been humbled and one who had learned to forgive. Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder, the same hand the world once dismissed as dirty, and in that touch, something shifted. Behind them, the city breathed, sirens in the distance, the hum of traffic, the faint smell of smoke still lingering from the night of the crash. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was thinner now, softer, like grief after forgiveness. Later, as Isaiah walked home, he passed the memorial candles still burning along the street, each one for someone lost in the explosion. Their flames flickered against the dusk, fragile but alive. He paused for a moment, his reflection dancing in the light. He thought about how easily people turn away when truth gets uncomfortable, how mockery becomes a defense, how silence becomes complicity. He thought about Crane, now facing charges for negligence, and the chief, stripped of the swagger that once filled every room he entered. Isaiah had no joy in their downfall. The truth didn't make him happy, it made him responsible. Because now that the world was watching, he had to show them what integrity looked like in motion. So he kept walking, slow, steady, carrying the weight of justice not as a weapon, but as a promise. When he reached his workshop, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of metal and grease wrapped around him like an old memory. The same tools that built engines had now built something bigger, his name, his respect, his place in a world that once tried to silence him. He walked over to the small wooden shelf where his father's old photo sat. The man in the picture wore the same work overalls Isaiah did now. His father had always said, "A man's worth isn't in the uniform he wears, but in the work he stands by." Isaiah smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't show teeth, just peace. He wiped the soot from the frame, then whispered, "You were right, Pop, always were." Outside, the wind carried away the last of the ash that had hung in the air since the crash, and with it, the weight of being misunderstood. In that moment, Isaiah understood something deeper than victory. He realized that power doesn't corrupt men, fear does. The fear of losing status, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being seen as less. But when a man learns to stand in truth, quietly, firmly, without apology, that's when the smoke truly clears. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, the city lights began to glow, soft and golden. Somewhere out there, a young officer would remember his words. Somewhere else, another man might think twice before mocking someone he didn't understand. Isaiah looked out the window, his reflection merging with the faint shimmer of the world outside. The pain, the humiliation, the long nights of doubt, they hadn't broken him, they had built him. And as the city settled into the calm after the storm, one truth stood tall above all others. Never mock a man for where he stands until you understand what he stands for. Because sometimes the man covered in smoke is the only one who can see through the fire.